Hi, everybody. Welcome to Howard David Live. Getting ready for the beginning of the playoffs this weekend. We now are joined by Daryl Slater of the Newark Star Ledger, covering both the Giants and the Jets. Daryl, at the beginning of the year, both teams coming off non-playoff seasons, the expectations were, I'm not sure if they were higher for the Giants than they were the Jets. The Jets had a very strong draft. The Giants, with the drafting of Thibodeau, who now is paid off, with the exception of the snow angel thing, I think he's added to the Giants' pass rush, certainly.
No doubt. I mean, if you look at the Giants draft class, he's been a productive member, no doubt, this year. Evan Neal struggled, the right tackle. You see a lot of offensive tackle struggle as rookies. Andrew Thomas did and is one of the best tackles in the league right now. But the Jets had just an otherworldly draft, and the way things turned out for Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson, two of the best rookies in the league. So Joe Douglas can hang his hat on that, even though Zach Wilson really obviously hasn't worked out. So we always sit here and talk a lot about the future at this time of year for these teams, and we are for the Jets because they did collapse and weren't able to build on that strong start. But ultimately, a year of progress for the Jets and some young players to build on, even though the quarterback question looms large.
Let's deal with the Giants first. Headed to the playoffs for the first time since 2016. That leads to my first question. When you are not used to making the playoffs and then all of a sudden you can be overwhelmed with what's ahead of you against a team, particularly the Minnesota Vikings, who have proven that they can win at a big spot. It beat the Giants early on the Christmas Eve, as I recall, with a 61-yard field goal. So you got to deal with a couple of things, but the most notable from the Giants' defensive point of view is dealing with Justin Jefferson. For my money, he's the best receiver in the league.
Oh, 100%. He's the best receiver in the league. And he got the Giants for 133 yards in the first game. And then he had that 17-yard catch on 3rd and 11 to set up the 61-yard field goal. And so very clearly the best receiver in the league. The Giants didn't have Xavier McKinney in that game. Their free safety was still recovering from the hand injury from his bye week ATV accident. But he's back. And after Sunday's game in Philadelphia, where the Giants rested all their starters, almost all their starters, he said, yeah, Justin Jefferson can be shut down. Easier said than done because the Giants may or may not have Adoree Jackson back for this game. He hasn't played in 2 months with a sprained MCL. So we'll see. I mean, can the Giants shut down Justin Jefferson? I mean, probably not shut him down, but can they limit him to less than a 133? I mean, this guy is so good that 133 is the 7th most yards he's had this season. He's got 6 games better than 133, which is insane. And so obviously going to be a huge challenge for the Giants. The Vikings have looked beatable, but that part of the matchup has to be concerning for Wink Martindale.
The last Sunday, you already mentioned they rested most of their starters against Philadelphia. But I detected a lot of fight in the Giants in a game that didn't mean anything to them.
Yeah, they played hard. Their backups played hard. They didn't even play their backup quarterback. They played their number 3 quarterback, Davis Webb, and pretty much no high-profile players played in the game. Kenny Golladay got his first touchdown with the Giants, which is amusing. I mean, obviously he'll be gone after this year. It hasn't worked out, but yeah, they played hard, and that kind of trickles down from their coach, Brian Daboll, who has sort of won this team over with a mix of fury and friendly, as I put it earlier this year when I wrote a story about him. He's been more relaxed around the building than Joe Judge, and hasn't grinded these players as hard in practice. And obviously he's a better offensive mind than Joe Judge. That's been very clear this season up in New England and with the Giants. I got more out of Daniel Jones, but that intensity that you've seen on the sideline from Daboll is very much him as well. And this is a guy who's coached in 30 playoff games between his time with the Patriots. He has 24 there, 6 with the Bills over the past 3 seasons. He's playoff tested, even if his roster is not.
Daboll's got 5 Super Bowl rings from his time with the Patriots. But the roster, the Giant roster, has got 7 guys that have played in a playoff game. That's a lot to ask from a bunch of young players.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the their starters who have played in a playoff game. A couple of them are the kicker and the punter. Not a lot of the marquee players have played in playoff games. Adoree Jackson has, but not Xavier McKinney, not Dexter Lawrence, not Leonard Williams, Daniel Jones. You go down the list. I mean, obviously not Kayvon Thibodeau, he's a rookie. Saquon Barkley, all of these guys who they're going to be depending on in a big spot in Minnesota have not. But on the flip side of that, they have gone up there like less than a month ago and they almost beat the Vikings in a tough place to play. The Vikings 13-4 this year. They did have a minus 19 point differential heading into the final game of the year, and they were 12-4, which is hard to do statistically. So they've been vulnerable, but also have been really tough to beat at home, as the Giants saw, and tough to beat in close games. I mean, the Giants have been really good in close late game situations, but the Vikings have been certainly better. That's why they are where they are.
Saquon Barkley had a disappointing year last year. Far from that this year. He started out quickly, finished with over 1,300 yards compared to 593 last year. I remember asking Bill Parcells about his feelings about Saquon Barkley, and he said he will become a better runner when he runs between the tackles because a lot of his work is done outside. Well, I think he's run between the tackles a little bit better this year, and ergo the production.
Yeah, and he's been healthy. That's been a big thing. I mean, last year he was still dealing with some of the residual effects of the knee injury that he suffered early in the previous season and tore his ACL. And so he's not hesitant anymore. And he said this from the get-go this year in the summer that he felt back to himself and he was very confident from even the spring, talking about I think his quote back in the spring was he was motivated. He wanted to kill everybody in terms of prove doubters wrong and tear apart defenses. And he had a pretty remarkable start to the year, a little bit of a tail off late, dealt with a bit of a shoulder injury midseason. He seems to be fresh, didn't play in Philadelphia. They'll need every bit of him on Sunday in Minnesota. There's no doubt about that.
How would you evaluate, Daryl, the Minnesota Vikings, A, their overall defense, and B, their pass rush?
Yeah, it's been problematic, certainly at times. I mean, this is a defense that has been vulnerable. I mean, if you just look at what the Giants were able to do, on Christmas Eve, they drove in a minute down the field and 75 yards, scored a touchdown, got a 2-point conversion, tied the game. It looked like it was going to go to overtime before the 61-yard field goal. But there's certainly vulnerabilities there in terms of the pass rush. The Giants have had trouble pass protecting at times this year, and Evan Neal is an issue. He has not played well as a rookie. I mean, there's no doubt about that. That doesn't mean he's not going to be a good player down the road, but it's been a tough sledding type of year for him. And so let's see how they attack Evan Neal and how he answers. Obviously, Andrew Thomas, the left tackle on the other side, has been outstanding. And that's where Evan Neal wants to get to. But the reality for Evan Neal right now is, he's on this roller coaster and he needs to just try to hold on. And the Giants need him, whether it comes giving him some blocking help or whatever. They need to do everything they can to get this guy to hold on. And push them as far as they can. We're just one of the parts, but he'll be an important one for sure.
We talked before about the Giants' inexperience in the playoffs. The Vikings have been there more recently, obviously, but they haven't been consistent. They would go to the playoffs one year, miss it the next. Go to the playoffs one year, miss it the next. But you're talking about a franchise. They got a lot of history to it. The fact of the matter is, that here is a team that's going to be facing Daniel Jones, an improved Daniel Jones. He hasn't thrown for a lot of yards. I think maybe 5 teams in the league this year have the quarterbacks that have passed for less yards than Jones. But by the same token, he's only thrown 5 interceptions, something he was guilty of in the past when he would turn the ball over.
Yeah, hugely important, limiting turnovers. And that's one thing Brian Daboll and his staff have focused on, including Mike Kafka, who's the play calling offensive coordinator. They've really focused on limiting those turnovers, and he's done a nice job of that, and including, plus using his feet. That's been a big asset for Daniel Jones this year, and using his feet wisely, not putting himself in risky situations where he could get hurt. So he stayed durable. He stayed mostly turnover free. He's up in quarterback rating to 14th, I think, in the league, was 26 last year. So no, he's not Aaron Rodgers, and he probably never will be in that, but you know what? That's fine. You can win maybe not win a Super Bowl, but you can win and give yourself a shot and obviously get into the playoffs with a quarterback like Daniel Jones, and with Daniel Jones specifically, they did it. So their offense is opportunistic. I mean, they're 24th in Pro Football Focus and offensive rating, but they're 7th in red zone efficiency. So same goes for their defense. They haven't been great on a play in, play out basis defensively, especially coverage wise, but they're great in the red zone. So that matters. And they have 4 fourth quarter comeback victories. Daniel Jones has led 4 fourth quarter comeback victory drives in 9 games, 9 wins and a tie there. So 9.5 wins really. So there's a lot to that. And he's proven to himself and to his teammates and to everybody else that he's capable of doing it in big spots this year. You talk about a big spot. If they won that game in overtime in Minnesota, that drive that he had to tie the game with a 2-point conversion would have been enormous, because if they won that game, they would be in the playoffs. They wound up clinching it the next week because of all the other things that happened, and they locked up the 6th seed with a week to go by beating the Colts, who are awful. But it all worked out for the Giants. They got in with the 6th seed, and they don't have to play the Niners too, because if the Packers beat the Vikings in week 17, the Giants wind up dodging the 49ers, which would have been a really tough matchup. This one's, I think, certainly easier for them, but certainly no gimme either.
He's Daryl Slater of the Newark Star Ledger, covering the Giants and the Jets. We'll get to the Jets in a moment. We're looking at a quarterback from Minnesota in Kirk Cousins that has had flashes of some big games, and obviously having a receiver of the caliber of Justin Jefferson certainly doesn't hurt.
Yeah, it doesn't. And Cousins is statistically an excellent quarterback. I mean, this is only his 2nd playoff appearance in 5 seasons in Minnesota, and they went 1-1 the last time, I think 2018. They win the wild card round, lose the divisional round. So he's yet to get over the hump in terms of what he was expected to do there. I mean, they paid him a king's ransom to come up there. Everyone remembers the Jets were in on him in that same offseason. They draft Sam Darnold, and so that, everyone knows how that worked out. But this is going to be an enormous opportunity for Kirk Cousins. I mean, all the pressure really is on the Vikings. I mean, the Giants would never say that. I mean, the Giants Brian Daboll would never say, "Oh, it's gravy." Everything that happens is a plus now, and they're playing with house money or whatever you want to put it. But that's the reality. I mean, all the pressure here is on the Vikings, given the ghosts of their playoff past, given everything hovering over Kirk Cousins, and the fact that they're 13-4 and how well they've played at home. That's the reality objectively of the situation here.
The Vikings, over the course of their history, have had some bright spots, but when you get right down to it, they haven't gotten the NFC title game since 1988. That's a lot of losing. I think they've been to 4 Super Bowls, and they've lost them all. I don't know that their fans dwell on that. I think they're more current with what's going on right now. But when you look at the balance in the NFL right now, I'm looking, and this is just a personal opinion, I'm looking at San Francisco, Philadelphia in the NFC, Buffalo, Kansas City in the AFC. Who am I leaving out? Anybody?
No, I mean, the Bengals maybe in the AFC, I think, would be a team that could certainly challenge. I think if you look at the Vikings as a 3 seed, they're looked at as a pretty vulnerable 3 seed. They're only favored by 3 points in this game, which basically tells you that Vegas thinks these 2 teams are equal. That home teams typically get 3 points. So
right.
Yeah, I think the top of the NFC very clearly the Niners and Eagles, and maybe even the Niners being the better of those 2 teams, even with Brock Purdy playing quarterback, which is saying something about their defense. And obviously on the other side, those top 3 teams in the AFC are really, really strong in no particular order: Chiefs, Bills, Bengals. So I think those would be the teams to look at. I mean, usually every year there can be a team that sneaks through. I mean, as a 6 seed in 2019, Adoree Jackson and the Titans went to the AFC Championship game, and the Giants just so happened to be a 6 seed this year. And so he was saying, ever since the Giants won in Washington on that Sunday night game a few weeks ago, which was enormous, basically put them in the playoffs, on the brink of it at least. He's basically saying, why not? Why can't the Giants do that? And I think that's a legitimate argument. The Giants have a type of dominant runner like Saquon Barkley, sort of mirrors what the Titans had with Derrick Henry. They have a quarterback who's, they've gotten more out of, like the Titans did in 19 with Tannehill. Now the Giants getting more out of Daniel Jones. So there are some similarities there. A lot of it depends on the matchups. And the Giants have, like I said, they got a favorable one compared to what they could have gotten in round 1.
Yeah, no question. Darrell, the beginning of the year, everybody knew that Daniel Jones, the Giants elected not to pick up his fifth-year option. So now it's on him from day one to prove that he's worth whatever money he thinks he can get. Well, he's proven that, and just to again, you're closer to it than I am, but I don't see any way the Giants don't have a sincere interest in keeping Daniel Jones.
Well, not only has he performed well, they can't draft a quarterback because they're too low in the draft at this point. And so they're going to have to give him a contract of some sort. It doesn't have to be a Patrick Mahomes contract. Now they have the ability to franchise tag him and use that franchise tag to kind of keep him locked in and then negotiate until July 15th on a long-term contract, which is what we could be looking at here. Or Jones could say, look, I'll play the year on the tag. Go ahead. We'll see. I mean, if I was him, I would take the guaranteed money because the franchise tag number becomes the floor for negotiation. So I think it's like 30 something million dollars. Then you can add however much you want on top of that. I mean, to me, you take the whatever, say however much guaranteed it would be beyond the tag number. Yeah, I mean, if you're him, then you're in a great position right now because your team, not only has he played well, and he's shown he can be a starting quarterback in this league. Albeit again, it doesn't look like a Hall of Famer, but that's okay. You can win with him, and they have. And so they have a lot of other issues to sew up here on this team. They don't need to be going out right now and looking for a quarterback, and they won't be just because they can't. So he's earned it. He's earned something this year. I mean, he's going to make some money one way or the other.
It seems to me after what happened last week with Damar Hamlin, that all of a sudden players in the league, if they didn't think about it before, they're thinking about security now, right?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, fortunately, Damar Hamlin looks like he's going. He's alive, most importantly, and hopefully will make a full recovery and live, most importantly, a productive life as a person. His football career is up in the air. And that, objectively, as you look at it, it's a small earning window for these guys to provide long-term financial security for their families. And that's why you see a lot of guys take that second contract when they can get it. That's why you see a guy like Quinnen Williams with the Jets basically saying, there's no way I'm playing on the fifth-year option next year. I'm not doing it. You're giving me a contract this offseason. That's the way it is. I played well through 4 years. And quite frankly, Dexter Lawrence drafted the same year as Quinnen Williams. He should be saying the same thing. I am not playing on the fifth-year option next year. You will be paying me this offseason. They have the cap space to do it. They should do it. He's their best player, period. He doesn't play their most important position, but he's their best player. So, yeah, no, because of the nature of the sport and these contracts not being guaranteed, you have to take the guaranteed money when you can get it, and you have to push for it when you can get it. And I think that's absolutely true.
Darrell, let's look at the Jets. The Jets at one point in the season, I believe, were 7-4. That was the last time they had a win. They finished the season horribly, and it was predominantly the offense was non-existent. And yet when Robert Saleh has been asked about his offensive coordinator, he stood right there and defended him. Look, I understand a head coach, he's going to protect his players, he's going to protect his coaches, but the proof's in the pudding. He haven't scored a touchdown in 3 games. So how can you be that excited about your offensive coordinator?
Well, I think, part of it goes, he's really close with Mike LaFleur and Matt LaFleur. I mean, those guys go back years to college, so they're good friends. And so you could take that as a plus or a minus in terms of him defending this guy. And we'll see what Woody Johnson says. Does he go to Robert Saleh and say, fire the offensive coordinator or you're out? Or does he trust Robert Saleh and say, let's keep rolling? I think there'll be a middle ground here where I think ultimately Mike LaFleur will stick around. They will bring in and Robert Saleh said they're going to do this. Bring in a senior offensive assistant. Greg Knapp was supposed to be that guy in 2021. Tragically died in a bike accident, was hit by a distracted driver before that season. And so the Jets have gone 2 years without really having a person in that type of role. And one guy to look for. Rich Cimini of ESPN brought this up. Gary Kubiak would be an interesting person to fit that role. I resisted the urge to jokingly bring up Marty Morningweg. That's not happening. Former Jets OC. But you're right. I mean, the offense is a struggle. I mean, they lose 11-6 and to the Dolphins in the finale. They lose 23-6 to Seattle the week before, and their playoff hopes go up in smoke. 19-3 to Jacksonville the week before, which put their playoff hopes on the brink. You know, and the 17 points, 12 points in the previous two. They scored 22 up in Minnesota. But really the last 5 games, they did nothing offensively. And so a lot of it gets back to, you know, they just don't have competency, a competent play at quarterback. And if you don't have that, it's hard to win in the NFL. And they have had subpar play at quarterback from Zach Wilson. He doesn't look like he's going to be the answer. You wonder if they bring in Jimmy G or Derek Carr next year. If they bring in one of those guys, very clearly they've moved on from Zach Wilson. And so that's the reality they're facing right now. They have to figure out a way, because next year is a hugely important year for Robert Saleh. I mean, his job will be on the line. And quite frankly, Joe Douglas's job could be too. I mean, Joe Douglas has been around since the summer of 2019. And he got a 6-year contract. So I do the math on that. But yeah, I mean, the clock is ticking on their head coach and their GM. They need to deliver results next year because they have a really good defense. Their defense is very, very good. So they can win with that defense if they get even competent quarterback play.
So you think that Robert Saleh is safe for now?
I do for now. I would be surprised if he is fired. I think Brian Costello of the Post did a good breakdown on why he thinks that they should keep Robert Saleh, but also the reality is that I haven't looked at this specifically. They're paying multiple they'd be paying multiple coaches yet again. You know what I mean? Like they're still paying. The Adam Gase is coming off the books soon, so they don't want to be paying Robert Saleh and, you know, if he's fired, and the next coach, right? So it would be nice, presumably, if you're Woody Johnson, even though he has ungodly sums of money, to only be paying one coach through this year, and that coach being the guy who's coaching your team.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Joe Douglas because he had a great draft last year. And there's a part of me that wonders, suppose Breece Hall doesn't get hurt.
Yeah.
Where would the Jets be?
Yeah, no, I mean, he was an enormous part of their offense, especially when you don't have really good quarterback play. You know, leaning on him was a big part of what they were doing and how they were winning. And then he gets hurt, and Elijah Vera Tucker getting hurt as well was a huge blow to their offense. I mean, remember, Joe Douglas came in the summer or after the 2019 draft, right? Replaced Mike Maccagnan. So that would mean his first draft was 2020, 21, 22. I mean, that he's had 3 full off seasons to make over this roster. I think he got a 6-year contract. So that was what, 1921, 2, 3, 4, 1921, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. So he's under contract through 2024. If they were to move on from him after this year, they're only paying him for 1 extra year. So it's at this point after 2023, they need to decide, really, do we want to extend this guy or do we want to get rid of him? That they're at a crossroads at this point. And I think a lot depends on what he does at quarterback, because even though he did have a really good 2022 draft and has drafted some other players, some of his picks have really not worked out. And most notably, obviously, Zach Wilson.
Well, Zach Wilson, Mike White. Do the Jets have a quarterback? Now, Mike White had flashes. I was stunned last week when he didn't get clearance to play, which means he obviously got hurt in the game before. Do the Jets keep? I can't believe they're going to keep Zach Wilson, but Robert Saleh says, and I understand he's playing politics. He doesn't want to tip his hand right now, but Mike White has shown flashes where he could play.
Yeah. So what do you do if you're Joe Douglas? Do you keep Mike White's a free agent? So do you keep Mike White? You're not going to have to pay him a lot of money to keep him, obviously. And then obviously keep Zach Wilson and bring in a veteran quarterback, or how do you slice it? So it can't hurt to have options. But again, they're in a situation next year where they've got to win. They have to win next year. And there are parts of their roster, it's there are parts of the roster you look at and you say they should be winning. Their defense is really good. When Breece Hall comes back, a really good running back, and Garrett Wilson's an excellent receiver. I mean, so they have really encouraging pieces that say they should be winning now, from multiple, and they need to be winning now. So they need to go out and figure out win now solutions in free agency. And that's why you could see Jimmy Garoppolo, you could see Derek Carr. I'd be curious to see how Derek Carr handles the pressure and the scrutiny of playing in New York, considering how he's handled that or hasn't handled it in, with the Raiders. But very clearly he'll be on the move. So yeah, Joe Douglas needs to find a way for this team to produce more than it did this past year. I mean, they finished what? 7-10, which is better than most people expected, right? I think that's fair to say. But ultimately, when you lose your last six games?
Yeah.
Yeah. You go 0 for December and 0 for January, 0-4 in December and 0-2 in January. It's hard to put a smiley face on that, even though 7-10, if you said 7-10 at the start of the year, okay, good. But it's sort of how they got to 7-10. Now, so next year, they got to get to 9 wins, right? I mean, I think there's no doubt about it. They got to be knocking on the door in the playoffs. If they miss the playoffs at 9-8, I think how they do it will depend on will have a lot to do with whether Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas are back. But if they're in the playoffs, and there's no question, go make the playoffs and answer all the questions. That's what it comes down to for the Jets next year. There's no more accepting anything less than what they did this year. And I think 7-10 won't be enough to cut it either next year.
Let's put Darryl Slater on the spot this weekend. Certain games stand out to me, most notably Dallas, Tampa Bay on Monday night rather. We talk, at this time of the year, everybody says, well, this coach is on the hot seat. Mike McCarthy doesn't get out of the first round. I got to believe he's gone.
Yeah. Jerry Jones was asked that today, it made its rounds today. And he said, no. Of course, he's not going to say he's gone if he loses in the first round, but I'm sure he's thinking it. Sean Payton's out there. Sean Payton is about to get back in the mix. Is he going to be in Denver, or could he be in Dallas? Jerry Jones has seemingly long had eyes for Sean Payton, and
right.
I think the Cowboys do win the game though in Tampa. Tampa's had a lot of problems this year, but I think they win. Now the question becomes, if they lose in the divisional round, what do they do with Mike McCarthy? I think if they lose in the wild card round, he's gone. But I think they will survive and advance on Monday night.
Tampa Bay loses, Tom Brady gone?
It doesn't sound, you'd think so, but I saw he had a conversation with Steve Young on his podcast where he kind of read between the lines. It makes it seem like he wants to keep playing.
In Tampa Bay?
That's the bigger question, right? Is he gone in Tampa? And where would he go, right? I mean, so you'd have to sit down and look at that. I haven't spent a ton of time sitting down and looking at where he could go. There's a lot of filled seats around the league, right? And he's not going to the Jets, by the way. So,
are you sure?
I guess stranger things have happened. Maybe not stranger things have happened, but yeah, no, I think he'll be back. But it would be a heck of a win because the Cowboys are good. I know they lost to the Commanders last week, but they're a really good team, so they should win. That game on Monday night.
Sunday night in prime time, you got Ravens and Bengals. A lot of people are saying that, don't look past the Ravens. We don't know Lamar Jackson's health. What is it? But right. The way that Joe Burrow is playing right now, I gotta like the Bengals.
I do too. They're 6.5-point favorites at home. I don't know if they'll cover that, but I think they'll win.
You do?
Yeah, and Burrow has been playing really well, and he's MVP candidate, and Lamar Jackson long layoff, and dealing with a knee injury, and with the way he plays the game, that could be an issue.
I mentioned before about coaches on the hot seat. This is amazing. 32 teams in the league. 18 coaches have been fired in the last 3 years. Talk about job security.
Yeah, major turnover. I mean, that's just the way it is these days. Not a lot of patience.
Well, we'll see. Darryl, appreciate your insight. Thanks a million. You stay safe and enjoy the weekend.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
He's Darryl Slater of the Newark Star Ledger. covers the Giants primarily and also the Jets. As we shift gears a little bit, and there he is, my man. He is Mark Cannizzaro of the New York Post, who has been covering the Jets now for how long, Mark?
Well, I was the Jet beat writer for 17 years, Howard, from 1993 to 2010, and I've been doing columns focusing on both Jets and Giants since then. So I've been around them for a long time.
Yeah. I always hear this phrase, same old Jets, same old Jets. Well, you've been covering it a long time. And I asked, look, I was the broadcaster for the Jets during the Parcells time. They were very good then. They got to the AFC Championship game when I thought they were the best team in the Final Four, but it didn't work out because they turned the ball over. But now here it is, and I asked Bob Wischusen this, week in, week out. You're just always waiting for the shoe to drop, right?
Well, you kind of are, but you not to be Pollyanna, but with this new regime and with the the energy and the enthusiasm that Robert Saleh has brought, they've been trying to distance themselves from that. Unfortunately, and they look like they had, at 6-3 and 7-4, and looking like a playoff team. But the last 6 weeks, particularly the last 3, in which they failed to score a single touchdown, which is just inexplicable. And missing the playoffs yet again for a 12th straight year, it's kind of hard to distance yourself from that because it is the same old Jet result, isn't it? At the end of the day.
Yeah, he's Mark Cannizzaro of the New York Post. Robert Saleh, like a head coach will do, is going to defend his coaches, defend his players. So when you look at Mike LaFleur, and you already established the fact their offense has been non-existent, particularly in the last 3 weeks. How do you, and I realize they have a history. He and his brother have a history with Saleh. So how do you distance yourself from this guy?
Well, I don't know that you need to, Howard, and I know Jet fans don't want to hear that, but I personally am a fan of continuity, and there's a lot of moving parts and elements to this too. The Jets have, starting with Saleh, and then yesterday when we spoke to General Manager Joe Douglas, they stand firmly behind trying to develop Zach Wilson. And this is going to be year 3 for Zach. The first 2 have been a mess. I mean, if we're being honest, there just hasn't been. Listen, you can look at some tape and see maybe there's been some progress, but at the end of the day, there really hasn't been a lot of progress. The results have been the results. So if they want to bring him back for a year 3, first of all, that's complicated enough because Robert and Joe are probably going to be on some, whether it's stated or not, and it won't be stated, but some sort of playoff mandate. Year 3 in this program with the talent they have, the defense they've got, the offensive guys that Douglas has drafted, and Garrett Wilson, obviously, and Breece Hall, who'll be back from his knee injury. This team they got to play a playoff game next year. They just have to. And I'd be shocked if they aren't in the playoffs next year, that they get a year 4. So that said, let's put that in this little corner of the table. Now, Zach Wilson, are you going to put all of your eggs in that basket if you're Saleh and Joe Douglas? This is a guy that's been not a very good quarterback. He's been one of the worst quarterbacks in the league statistically for the last 2 years. I get it. You want to try to develop him. And in the column I wrote in today's paper, they need to go out and get an established veteran, Jimmy Garoppolo, who's a proven winner, for as many detractors as he has, he's got a 40-17 win-loss record. Okay. You don't do that just with other good players around you. You have to be at least a functioning quarterback. And you can't tell me that if they didn't have a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo quarterbacking them this year, that they would not be preparing for a playoff game this week. So circling around back to LaFleur, if you are committed to keeping Zach and continuing to develop him, how do you do that? By completely tearing up the offensive system and bringing a new guy in, right? A new coach in. So what I reading between the lines and reading the tea leaves yesterday after speaking with Robert, he used the word definitely in terms of his plans to bring on a senior offensive assistant to assist with the offense. To me, that was step 1 of him retaining LaFleur. So I know a lot of Jet fans want their pound of flesh, and the easiest pound of flesh is Mike LaFleur. And I get that, but is it really best for the organization next year and moving forward? I'm not trying to make excuses for Mike LaFleur, but look at the quarterbacks he's been dealing with. Zach, who we just spoke about, Joe Flacco, who's, pushing 40, he's late 30s. And I love Joe personally, but, he didn't perform that well when he was in. I mean, he did a great job in the Cleveland game, bringing him back, obviously early in the year. And then Mike White, who appears to be a career backup. I mean, so what we're saying here is Mike LaFleur has not had a legitimate starting quarterback in his quarterback room since he's been here in 2 years. So, I think that they need to kind of keep it together, keep some continuity, but bring a new body in, bring a proper established NFL quarterback in. Maybe a Derek Carr. I'm a little concerned about Carr because he seems like a statistics guy. And, his one-loss record has not been very good. In fact, it's quite poor. But, that's also a product of him not having a lot of good teams around him defensively and whatnot, too. So it's just, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but there's so many parts to this, Howard, and I don't think that the best way for the Jets to go about the next step is to just whack the offensive coordinator and start over again.
Mark Cannizzaro of the New York Post. Let me go back to Garoppolo. I'm fascinated with the fact that everybody's looking to get rid of him. Just look at, you already indicated his one-loss record, but he wins. I just don't understand this urgency. And look, Brock Purdy's done a nice job since he's been there. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at San Francisco and saying they're my team. I think they could go all the way.
Well, that defense is so good, and listen, and Garoppolo has been a beneficiary of that, of course. I think you're right. It is an odd thing. They were in such a hurry to get Trey Lance in that, and obviously he suffered that horrible, I think, broken leg earlier, right at the beginning of the season. The Garoppolo it is a curious case, I have to admit. I mean, it's nobody seems to, the 49er fans don't really embrace him like you'd think they would for a guy that brought him to a Super Bowl. Listen, one issue that I didn't address in the column with Garoppolo, which has to be looked at, is his durability. He has had injury issues. And what do they say? The best player's best ability is their availability, right? So Garoppolo has not been available this year. The 49ers struck gold, obviously, with Purdy, and they're carrying on. It's interesting. I read something. I don't know if it was on Twitter or if it was a report, but that as the 49ers get into these playoffs, it sounds like Garoppolo is healthy enough, so they have an option to go back there. I can't imagine that Shanahan would do that. You got to. I mean, I think the 49ers. I should know this off the top of the head. I think they've won about 8 in a row or something leading into the playoffs. So why would you mess with what's working? You can't do that. But the bottom line is, I think durability is an issue with Jimmy G. But he has not really been embraced, oddly enough. But listen, he's a 67-point-something% completion guy. He doesn't turn the ball over a lot. I get it. Maybe the 40-17 record is a product of having a really good defense around him. But man, look at the alternatives. I mean, it's not good. I mean, the Jets had Zach Wilson led the team with 6 touchdown passes this year. I mean, your starting quarterback with 6 touchdown passes. I mean, Patrick Mahomes gets that in a half of one game, right?
Mark, when it comes to you look at the Jets and you say about their defense, yes, they've got a good defense, but they gave up the big play against Detroit that cost them the game. They gave up the big play. I can't remember against Seattle. That had something to do.
First play of the game, knocked them on their butts, basically. Yeah, that 60-yard run or whatever, 50 or 60-yard run.
Yeah, but at least you could see the makings of a really good defense, particularly with some of the players. Look, Quinnen Williams has made no bones about it. He wants to get paid.
Yeah, and he will. I think he will. I'll be shocked if he's not. I mean, listen, this is the centerpiece of their defense. You make a good point about the defense, Howard, and I'll say this. And again, I'm not trying to be an excuse maker, but the way I looked at it is like, just let's take the last few weeks as an example, right? The Jets are playing pretty good defense in that Detroit game, and they had a 4th and 1, and they got burned on it. Their safety didn't cover the tight end who slipped out, was wide open, 51-yard touchdown, minute 49 left, ball game. But the way I kind of look at it is, and again, I almost hesitate to say because I'm not trying to be an excuse maker, but this offense has been so bad on this team. I really feel at some point there's 2 things. First of all, if the defense makes one mistake like that, like it did in Detroit, for example, it's magnified tenfold because the offense isn't scoring touchdowns. They can't make up for it. So I feel like to some degree in the last month of the season, the lack of an offense, I don't want to use the word broke the Jets defense because they didn't really break, but it wore them down a little bit to the fact that, they were making those few mistakes that they did make, were glaring because, and ended up in some cases costing them Jets the game because the Jets were basically playing with one arm tied behind their back on offense. So, listen, look at the Miami game on this Sunday. The Jets, the Jets gave up 9 points until that safety at the end, right?
Mhm.
To lose that game, Jacksonville, I think it was at 17-3, the offense was absolutely just, it was like running in water. It was pathetic. But, at the end of the day, and they gave up 17 points. They gave up 20 points and lost to Detroit. You just can't, you can't survive that way, and I'm not, you can't get so seduced with the statistics, but let's be honest, the Jets this year gave up the 4th fewest points in the league, and they gave up the 4th fewest yards in the league. That has to count for something.
You would
So
think.
I just think it's very obvious if there was some sort of competent quarterback back there who was stayed healthy and there was some continuity, and listen, we're not even talking about the offensive line that was ravaged, but everybody deals with that stuff.
Right.
If they had just a remotely competent quarterback, a 22nd rated quarterback in the league, they'd be in playoffs this week. They just would.
I look at things watching a game. Oh, the Jets are going to run the ball up inside on first down. Well, they're going to run the ball either inside or outside on second down. They're going to try to pass on 3rd and long, punt. It got comical. I'm driving to my daughter's house last week, listening to the game, and Wischusen says, "What a great punt there was on a particular play." Well, the punter's got more experience doing that than anything else.
Yeah,
That's why he's good at it.
It's actually funny because Braden Mann has had a very mediocre to poor year this year, and
Yeah.
not a good year. Line drive punch, short punch, shanks, and he did have a really good game in Miami the other day. That's what he went out on. So, but before that Miami game, I would have said I'd be shocked if they didn't have another punter in next year. I'm sure they will certainly. Listen, punting is the least of their problems. But you brought the punting up, and it just kind of reminded me of one of the shortcomings.
I look at the way that now who's going to be the quarterback. That's obviously the biggest thing. But
Yeah.
getting back to LaFleur, there's a lack of creativity. There's predictability. We're seeing the same things over and over again. If I'm seeing that, other teams' defensive coordinators are seeing that. So it's easy to defend. But you're right. The biggest thing is who's playing quarterback.
Yeah.
If Zach Wilson's playing quarterback, there's going to be an upheaval in the fan base.
Well, unless Zach Wilson all of a sudden is become an actual NFL quarterback next year, yes, you're right. You mentioned LaFleur and the predictability. When we spoke to players yesterday, Garrett Wilson was one of the guys myself and some other reporters spoke to in the locker room, and he was talking about LaFleur, and I didn't get the feeling that he was overtly trying to criticize LaFleur, but maybe there was a subliminal message in there. Because he did say when he was asked what he felt went wrong in the last 6 or so weeks, and he just speculated, like, listen, maybe some of these defenses kind of had us figured out. That's a little damning to the offensive, staff and to LaFleur, because you have to evolve and you have to figure out, if teams are figuring you out, you got to come up with something else. So there's been times when I feel like LaFleur has been a good dynamic play caller, but you're right. The last month or so. There's also been times, by the way, where I feel he's been, and you just referenced it, way too conservative. There's that fine line. You don't want to abandon the running game, but you could make the argument they stuck with it too long in Miami, and basically, what I think it was horrible numbers in Miami. And listen, Breece Hall went out. The amazing thing, Breece Hall is the Jets' leading rusher this year, and he missed the last 10 games. That's you can't make that up, right? We spoke to him yesterday too, and he said, listen, when I went out, the offense changed. And this is a rookie saying, I thought it was pretty bold words, and he wasn't trying to be cocky, but it was truth. He was speaking truth. The offense was not the same after Breece left. And Michael Carter struggled a little bit this year in his sophomore, quote unquote, sophomore year of NFL ball. the Jets thought they had a little something in Bam Knight, who, had a couple of flashes, in a game or two, and then was absolutely stifled for the last 3 games. Now, whether Brees Hall would have been stifled too behind that offensive line, none of us knows, but he certainly was a dynamic runner. I'd like to see White get more, with this whole kind of quote unquote Niners offense, which I didn't see enough of. And maybe because they didn't really have the personnel, because Brees is the perfect guy for that. 49ers kill you with those dump offs, to the running backs. And, being, it's essentially a running play, but it gets you more than 3.5 yards, 4 yards, most of the time. So I didn't see a lot of that. And they tried it a little bit with Michael Carter, but Michael's not that kind of player. He's a bull rushing kind of, inside the tackles kind of guy. So, I do think the Jets have a lot of, they got a lot of guys coming back with Brees and Elijah Vera Tucker, who was their best offensive line, was lost in that same Denver game that Brees was and missed the last 10 games. The offensive line was held together with Band-Aids the last part of the year, with 37-year-old, Dwayne Brown at tackle and George Fant playing on a bad knee all year. Again, all sounding like excuses, but it's just reality. But so does that, did that affect the way that Mike LaFleur called games? Of course it had. Everything has an effect. But you're right. And I thought some of the things that Garrett Wilson said yesterday were a little, it was a bit of an indictment on the offensive play calling staff.
Mark Cannizzaro of the New York Post, you mentioned Garoppolo, you mentioned Derek Carr, and straighten me out on his contractual status if you can. Baker Mayfield, does his name even come into the conversation?
Yeah, I was talking to my editor about that. Yes, Mayfield, I believe, I have to say, I don't know his contract situation. He's bounced around to so many teams. I don't know what his status is. He played for 2-3 teams this year. Baker's an interesting, listen, if you're asking me if I think Baker Mayfield was Jets quarterback this year, would they be in the playoffs this week? Yes, I think they would. I'm not really a Baker hater. There's a lot of them out there. But you also wonder why this guy bounces from team to team to team. There's got to be reasons for that we don't see. So would he be my number one choice? No, but he's certainly a potential fallback option. Because it sure doesn't seem like Carolina, considers him the answer, right? And so I mean, the Carolina, LA, I just vapor locked. I got myself Cleveland, Carolina, LA. I'm like, geez. No, I mean, listen, he was a great story when he came out and played that night game in LA, but Matthew Stafford's coming back. He made it clear yesterday when speaking to reporters, he's not retiring. So, it seems like Baker's going to be another team next year, and I don't, the Jets can't be discounted without, I wouldn't discount the Jets at all.
I can maybe shed some light on it. A friend of mine works in Cleveland. Basically said, I said, what happened to Baker Mayfield? He said, locker room. I said, what? He goes, yeah. He said, he's got an issue in the locker room with other players, which maybe shed some light on it. I mean, I don't know it to be true, and maybe it's just a rumor. I don't know, but this is what I heard.
Yeah, listen, I mean, nobody, unless they're inside those locker rooms, really knows. We've heard so much about how Zach, quote unquote, lost the locker room with the Jets. Listen, I think he did lose it to a large degree, with those comments he made after the Patriots loss.
Right.
But I also think he did the right thing by standing in front of his teammates and apologizing, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
Yep.
And I think that at least a portion of that locker room realizes he's a 22-year-old kid in the spotlight who struggled, and he said something dumb. Is he the most beloved guy in that locker room and trusted? Certainly not. But does everybody in that room hate him? I could tell you factually that's not the case, because I've talked to players, off the record, just about the vibe. And as I said, they bring up what I just brought up. The kid's 22 years old, I mean, so with Baker, yeah, maybe he his commercialization and all that kind of stuff rubs people the wrong way, but maybe it rubbed 6 or 7 guys the wrong way. That thing doesn't mean the whole locker room doesn't like him. And listen, maybe he's cocky and your source is correct, and nobody in the room likes him. And that, if that's the case, if you're a team that's looking at him, you better do your research and figure that stuff out, because you can't have somebody like that as a quarterback in the locker room. Like, yeah, you listen, you covered, I don't know if you covered Boomer Esiason or not, and that was
No.
after your
Yeah,
excuse me. You know, I use Boomer as an example. Boomer is a guy I covered when he was a starting quarterback for the Jets, and I can't count. I don't know if I don't have enough hands to count the amount of times that I would stand in front of Boomer's locker, and he would explain away a game or what went wrong on certain plays, and I knew that he was protecting other guys on that team, on his offense, by taking the blame himself. That's quarterback does, you know, and that's why what Zach did was so opposite of what a pro like Boomer did, you know, when he was a player. And listen, all guys around the league do that. Daniel Jones will do that, you know. I mean, you know, but that's why it was such a stark smack in the face when you heard the way he spoke. Speaking of Wilson, after that,
right.
I do think he repaired it at least a decent degree. But you know that with Zach, now you get into who trusts him. And I mean, how do you trust if you're a defensive player in that room? How do you trust any of those quarterbacks? You know, as great a story as Mike White was and has been, you know, I mean, he wasn't producing touchdowns either, right? So, and your friend and my friend Bill Parcells, what do they always say? Quarterbacks judged by
Right.
wins and how often you get your team in the end zone, right? And those are the only two things that quarterbacks judge by.
Over the last 3 years, out of 32 teams in the NFL, 18 teams have made coaching changes. That's 6 a year. I don't think this year's going to be any different. You could see as many as 6 coaches. And obviously, you know, the sweetheart right now is Sean Payton. And I'm saying if, and I don't like going after people's jobs. That's not what I like to do. But if Dallas doesn't go deep into the playoffs, Mike McCarthy could be the one out.
Oh, I could see that. I mean, Jerry Jones is getting tired of getting knocked out, you know, early, and or you know, not getting to the playoffs or getting knocked out early in the playoffs. And everybody looks at this Dallas team and sees what the ceiling is, and it's pretty high. And I'm actually going down to Tampa to cover that game, that Buccaneers Dallas game on for the Monday night,
Right.
and that's a fascinating game because I mean, the Buccaneers have kind of stunk all year. I mean, they've just, you know, Brady hasn't been himself. You know, it's just been a weird year for them, and they, you know, literally the only reason they're even in the playoffs is the rest of that division is so pathetic.
Right.
So what if Tom Brady and the Bucks, you know, with their crappy regular season record, knocks Dallas off? I mean, I get it. You know, it's in Tampa, and I think, well, I don't even know what the point spread is. I think Dallas is favored by at least a couple points, but yeah, you're right. If they get bounced, you know, we've always heard about that affinity that Jerry seems to have with Sean Payton, who certainly was down there before as an assistant. So, the question there becomes with Sean is what the compensation is going to be, because he's still property of the Saints, as you know, and
Right.
Under contract. So anybody that's going to go after him, you know, it's funny. He's the name, and Harbaugh's the name, right? Jim Harbaugh. You know, I mean, I get emails from Jets fans. Why don't they just hire Harbaugh? Jim Harbaugh would be eaten alive in this town.
No doubt.
Skin is so thin. He is so flaky. And listen, I've had good dealings with him as a player. I'm not trying to kill the guy and, you know, I'm just kill his character, but it is not a fit. And you know, I don't know. There's just been too many examples of, you know, him flirting with pro jobs and stuff like that. And you know, I know he's listening. I know Denver's reportedly going to speak to him. And but yeah, I listen. The Jet fan needs to chill. Getting back to the Jets, Robert Saleh's not going anywhere. And you know, this year has been a weird year, right? I mean, they raised the bar by getting to 7-4. I know I just transitioned to the Jets, but they raised the bar to get 7-4. But now it looks so horrible with that. You know, if you were a Jet fan and you were told at the beginning of the year that you'd have 7 wins and be playing a game that might get you into the playoffs right up until the second to last game of the season, you would have signed in indelible ink for that, right? But so it's interesting the way the season's gone now. But I think what this season did prove is that the Jets have got something, you know, and they're a better team than they were the year before, and certainly much better than they were, you know, the year before that, when, you know, before Saleh got there. So you know, I guess I transitioned a little bit because we're talking about the hot coaches and Sean Payton, but um,
Harbaugh.
and Harbaugh. But I mean that those kind of situations are be careful what you wish for situations. I think Payton would be a good head coach in any team in the league right now.
He didn't ask me, but why would he go after a Denver job when he could go after a team that's got better personnel in Dallas?
Well, I don't know that he's going after anything. He's probably just sticking his toe in the water.
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, I listen. I don't know. None of us knows, but I'm not assuming that Sean Payton called Denver ownership.
Right.
They reached out to him, right?
Right.
So, yeah. Listen, if my feeling is and this is just an absolute guess, but I have a feeling Sean Payton will not coach this coming year. I think he'll go back in 24.
Really?
Just
Okay, it's interesting.
That's just a complete. And wherever he goes, he's gonna go because he's got all the he holds the cards. He's a hot prospect or whatever you want to call it. He's got to go somewhere where there's a good quarterback and strong ownership. And that ain't going on in Denver right now, is it?
Yeah. Hey, look, when it comes to Harbaugh, if I'm not mistaken, he's 1-8 in bowl games / playoff games.
Yeah. Listen, he's done a good job in Michigan, where I see it all over the place. Alumni's expectations run rampant and just become unattainable. I remember Charlie Weiss, Charlie, who I've stayed in touch with over the years. When Charlie went to Notre Dame, I went out there and played a golf outing with that he had a charity golf outing in Notre Dame, and I played with a couple of alumnus, and Charlie got there and fixed it. That program was pretty crappy when he got there. It was really downtrodden, and he got there and they were winning 9 games a year, 9-2, whatever. But they weren't, challenging for national championships. And those Notre Dame alumni, they think you should be, in the Final Four, every year, so to speak, in terms of the bowl championship series. So, and I just found that to be kind of unrealistic. And maybe we kill Harbaugh a little bit too much in the big games. I don't know, but he has beaten Ohio State, so that is important for them there. That seems to be more important than the bowl games, right?
Yeah, it cost Urban Meyer. This weekend, the Giants are playing the Vikings, which I find intriguing because Daniel Jones has had a pretty good year. He's not blowing you away with numbers, but he's eliminated a lot of turnovers, which was undoing the year before. So he didn't put up gaudy numbers, but he's a danger to opposing defenses with his arm and his feet. He can run the ball exceptionally well. I give the Giants a better than 50-50 chance to win.
I agree with you. I mean, listen, they lost by field goal, a few weeks ago out there, and
Right.
Listen, you got to keep Daniel healthy, but his legs are one of his greatest weapons. There's no question about it. What the Giants can't afford to do, in my opinion, on Sunday is get into a shootout out there. They need to keep that thing kind of, close to the vest as best they can because, Daniel, as much as I love Daniel and as terrific as his season's been, he's not with that receiving core, which is essentially practice squad receivers. They've been, there's been some terrific stories. Hodgins and all those guys are, Slayton was almost not going to make the team. I remember talking to Darius Slayton at the end of training camp, and it was very likely he was going to not make the final 53.
Mm-hmm.
And he's, their most experienced receiver right now in that group. So, other than Kenny Golladay, but that's a whole nother podcast. So,
well, he got a touchdown last week.
How ironic in a meaningless game in garbage time at the end. And listen, I don't know Kenny well. I've stood at his locker and spoken to him. He's never said a bad word, and he's not a rabble rouser. It's just been a really weird thing. And obviously Gettleman paid him way too much money, and that's like a anchor around his neck essentially, but he hasn't performed. Whatever, let's get into that. But my point is, the Daniel and that offense is not, they're not built to win a 33-31 game. They need to win a 21-17 game, or a 17-14 game or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, you never know how these games go. As they flow in different ways, but just kind of looking at it analytically going in, that's the kind of game that Brian Daboll wants it to be. So, it'll be very much on the Giants defense to keep that, that place is, I mean, that's a loud stadium, man. I love that stadium. It's a great, I mean, it's an awesome looking stadium, but it is loud in there. So it can get very, very, the natives can get restless there. So you want to keep them, back, heading to the beer stands and grinding the beers.
Justin Jefferson's a bad man.
Yeah.
Best receiver in the league, in my opinion. He could ruin another team's defense.
No question. It's too bad the Giants can't borrow Sauce Gardner from the Jets for the weekend, because nobody seems to be, taking advantage of Sauce this year. What a year he's had. So, yeah, listen, the Giants have got a, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think they got hurt that badly by Jefferson. He didn't ravage them in the first meeting. So, but you listen, he's going to make plays, and, Wink is going to probably have to, I'm sure he's going to have to move some stuff to that side in terms of help, wherever Jefferson is, but because you can't let him beat you. I mean, he could score 2 touchdowns in 20 seconds and you're down 14-0, so, yeah, that'll be, I mean, that's really the, because listen, Kirk Cousins was just heaving up, and, that's the beauty of having a guy like Jefferson. I've never been a big Kirk fan. Yeah, I just don't, there's something missing with him. I don't know what it is, but he's a guy that does win also. We were just talking about Jimmy G early in the podcast.
Sure.
But I don't know. I don't trust him, but, he's got numbers, and, but he also can just sling it around to Justin Jefferson. And most of the time Jefferson's going to come down with it. So that's something dangerous to watch for the Giants. There's no question. And I'm sure Wink Martindale is maybe lacking a little bit more sleep this week than he usually is, trying to devise something to keep him clamped.
Before you go, gotta ask you a golf question. In watching the tournament last weekend, Colin Morikawa had the tournament wrapped up, got a 9-shot lead over John Rahm in particular, and it went away. And the people, the broadcasters are talking about how devastating it is for Morikawa. Look, he's a young guy, and maybe it's devastating now, but eventually he'll get over it. I still think he's going to win a lot of tournaments. I think he's a great player.
Listen, I mean, I didn't, I was covering a game. I wasn't watching the final round. I was up in Buffalo doing the Bills Patriots and the whole Damar Hamlin thing, which is a whole other amazing day. But I looked at the numbers. I mean, John Rahm shot 10 under par for the day. I mean, it's not like, Colin Morikawa was Greg Norman at the 96 Masters. I mean, he shot under par. He shot a couple 3 under par, whatever was the end. Maybe it was 1 under par. I don't know what it was, but yeah, listen, Morikawa has had some closing difficulties, so he has formulated a little bit of a history of that. So that's something to watch. I think he's scarred by it. No, he's too young and too talented to be scarred by it. And he also played too damn well those first 3 rounds to be that concerned about his game. But listen, if he shot 76 and Rahm, scooted through and with a 3-4 under par final round and win, I mean, that's a different story. But Rahm he bogeyed his first hole and shot 10 under par.
Yeah, right.
I mean, John Rahm came and chased his ass down. You know what I mean? It wasn't really. I get it that that Colin didn't play as well as he played the previous 3 days, which was crazy golf. But you got to give Rahm credit there too. But I think it does bear some watching with Colin, even though he's young and super talented. And he's got a great head on his shoulders. I mean, he's one of my favorite interviews because he's candid, transparent, mature. He gets it, and he'll analyze it. He'll figure it out. But I don't look at this as something that's going to suck him down.
Yeah. My wife and I stayed at Kapalua once and played that golf course, the Plantation course, and the 1 par 5 where I'm playing it downhill, downwind, and hit it 330. I said to my wife, "Don't tell anybody it was downwind and downhill. I'm just going to tell everybody I hit it 330." And then I looked at some of the numbers these guys put up the other day. It was 1 tee shot. I forget who it was. Hit it 400 yards on that hole.
Oh, it's incredible. Yeah. I was there once myself as well. Stayed there at the Ritz, and it was a really magical experience out there.
Yeah.
And that course is pretty good for the ego, because it's pretty hard to lose a ball on that golf course.
Right.
You got to be real errant to lose a golf ball on that golf course.
Well, I felt privileged because my second shot to that par five was a 6-iron, and I felt pretty good until I saw some of the stuff that was going around there the other day. Always good talking to you, Mark, about golf, about football, about that painting over your shoulder. Did you paint that?
No, that is a Romero Brito, I think, actually, I should say, painting that my wife picked out, and he's a very, very. I'm going to
Cool.
I might screw this up. I think I believe he's Spanish, but he's a pretty very accomplished artist. We've got a couple pieces other than this as well.
Yeah, I've got one. So you mentioned the artist. I knew right away who it was.
Romero Brito, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, Romero Brito. Yep.
yeah. You stay safe, Mark. Always great talking to you.
Okay, Howard. Good talking to you.
He's Mark Cannizzaro, the New York Post, covers the Jets for a long time, covers the PGA Tour and a number of other things in a city in New York where there's so much going on. I only bring it up because last night in watching the Knicks blow a 17-point lead in the second half against Milwaukee didn't surprise me. The Knicks have shown tendencies to blow leads in the fourth quarter, and they went up against top 3 player in the league in Giannis Antetokounmpo. And it took me a long time to learn how to pronounce his name. But I really felt bad for the Brooklyn Nets. Kevin Durant goes down with an MCL injury to his knee. They say he could be out as much as a month, which is really kind of too bad because the Nets were good enough. They avoided injuries and they got themselves to where they got as high as second in the East. Now it's going to be a little bit tougher, but hopefully he gets back in time. They're halfway through the season now, still have 40-something games to play. We'll see how it all shakes out. So having said that, I look at the Knicks and saying they're playing better than I thought. And the reason is Jalen Brunson, no doubt about it. He had a career high last night with, I think it was 44, but Randall doesn't handle the ball as much as he did in the past, which is a good thing for the Knicks. I don't know if they can outlast Milwaukee, Philadelphia. Well, I was going to say Brooklyn, but we don't know. You still got Miami is hanging in the weeds. Indiana is hanging in the weeds. Cleveland is a very good team. So it's going to be interesting. And that's all you want. I'm Howard David. Thanks for being a part of Howard David Live. And you stay safe.